first of all, the exam results are posted. You should see them in the grade book. And we still have one classmate who hasn't taken the exam yet. So once that's done, I'll give back the answer sheets and we can look over the exam. A reminder, especially to some people, I think probably people who are streaming or whatever, but this concerns people who didn't turn in research term paper number 1. Again, a big heads up. There is no way you can get a passing grade if you haven't turned in research paper number 1. So last class, I put this out pretty clearly with numbers. I won't waste anyone's time doing that this class, but it has to be in by the end of the week if you want your midterm grade to reflect that. As I said, if you look at the numbers, there's no way to pass the class without doing that essay. If you're having troubles and you need to consult with me, I still have an office hour on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. in ArtX 170. You could come see me and we could talk about how to do the paper if you need to get over any troubles. Remember, the prompt is up there. There are 4 topics from which you can choose, and most of them would probably give you a pretty interesting experience, and it's a research paper, but the primary source for your research is a textbook. So it's not like you need tons of time to go to the library. If you have the textbook and it can be supplemented with online information, you can pretty much do this, whenever you work best. From 11 p.m. till 1 a.m. That's becoming one of my favorite times. But otherwise, it all depends on what works for you. Okay, so do stay in touch, and I've warned you again, okay? I want to see everybody do okay or even great in this class. All right. I don't see anyone burning with any questions or anything, so we'll jump right into audience measurement. Who's listening, who's watching, who's surfing? So first of all, if we're talking audience measurement, what do you know about it already? What comes to mind when we talk about ratings and audience measurement?
There's a lot. Determines if a show is renewed or canceled.
Yes, great. Okay. So ratings are of use to networks, or let's just say networks, generalized, right? Will the show be canceled? That for sure.
Question about ratings. If you record something, does that count as a watch rating?
Yes, more and more. Yeah, if you DVR it. Never used to, but given that everyone records everything, of course. Right? Okay. Now it does, yeah. So they have different windows that they rate now. It used to just be live. They wouldn't care if you recorded it. Then it was live plus 3. Now it's live plus 7 as well. So they'll have different numbers based on that data. But obviously they had to switch because people were consuming more and more off time. Yeah. You remember the term for when you watch a show and it's not when it's broadcast, but later on?
Rerun.
Well, that's for scheduling. There was time shifting, right? Time shifting. Okay. Yeah. You all. We'll review all of that when we talk about the exam results. It was one of the only questions that hung people up a little bit. But so time shifting. Remember, there's time shifting. There's place shifting. So the whole idea is, if broadcast comes at a particular time in your home, time shifting means you can record it, watch it at another time. Place shifting. With your Sling TV device, you can go and watch your stuff somewhere else on your laptop computer, or at work, or whatever you want. Okay. But now back to ratings. Where else have we heard about ratings? So they're useful for networks because the show might get canceled. Yeah.
Like selling advertising.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. So let's go a little bit further. So the show could be canceled. It establishes value of ad spots that can be sold. Let's put it that way. So at least 2 ways, and we won't delve into it any deeper, but it's useful to networks because of show might be canceled, and it's useful to let's let's just generalize, say advertisers, which could be local, could be network, could be cable, right? All different types of advertisers, because what they're looking at is, okay, it'll cost you more to put your ads onto a highly rated show than it will onto a poorly rated show. And so two reasons why ratings are absolutely essential, to establish what's popular and to establish really the value, right? So because 250,000 people, 250 million people approximately are exposed to the Super Bowl broadcast, they can charge $5 million for a 30-second spot on the Super Bowl broadcast because, the rating there is gigantic in a way that it never usually is during the year. There are certain kind of tentpole live events, sporting events, one-offs, and that get huge audiences. But week in, week out, advertisers are picking from a range of shows, and the way that they can evaluate what they want is going to be based on ratings. So great. That's important. And there's a few. A useful thing to look at. There are a few places that take the ratings data and do stuff with it. And TV by numbers it started out as like you used to see there were two guys running it, and you'd see them on Clement Street in a cafe and stuff, and it was basically just them. And so the site is based on taking Nielsen data and then kind of turning it into something that's interesting for people outside of the business, And so then they sold it to big corporation, and now it looks kind of all slick, and there's nowhere near as much fun on the site. But you'll notice that a lot of it is, what do they have the cancel bear, they call it. So basically a lot of it is conjecture about what shows are going to get canceled. Ghosted likely won't get Spirited Away. Superstore benefits from partial third season rule covers. I don't know what that is. So there's they try to take the ratings data and make it into like the horse race between different shows. Which one is, oh my God, it's in danger, it's flagging. And so since we're in the new fall season, which launched maybe 5 weeks ago, they launched, within a few weeks of each other, but not exactly at the same time because that would like separate out the audience anyway. So within the first 3-4 weeks, our shows are typically canceled, and so right now it's a big interest on the site. It's like, what's going to go down? What's going to manage to make it through? What's old and dying? What's new and hot? So these are sort of TV fan interests about ratings as well. So I guess we could add to that. Networks, advertisers, fans are also interested in the horse race. Let's call it that. Who's gonna make it? And there's a few other places I could put up some other links that to the same type of thing. But ratings are proprietary, which means you got to pay. You got to, as a station, a local station, you got to pay to get your audience rated, and of course the networks do too. So they pay money to Nielsen to get the data, but also if you don't pay, nobody else gets your data either. So it's really important to get the ratings. And for us, unfortunately, they don't just give it away to professors, whoever asks it. There was a library somewhere in the Midwest that would have the actual Nielsen ratings available like 2 months afterwards, but you'd have to like fax them, and they fax you back stuff. And I've actually got tired of it. So you can't get any of the really fine-grained ratings information that you would if you were a station or an ad buyer who pays. So we can just get the little bits that these folks give us. Yeah,
So I'm just curious on how expensive those numbers are to get.
In the tens of thousands of dollars per month.
Okay.
Yeah, it's expensive. But also what you get is like a whole kind of web marketing product. Like, in other words, you have a dashboard and you can set up all kinds of customizations, and it goes not just like the different percentages of who's watching what show, but Nielsen is also a marketing company. And so you get all of the demographic information. It's like, we will be able to find out for free that, let's say, 3.2% of the available audience watched, Ghosted or something like that. What you will know as a subscriber is exactly the demographics that breaks down into, and then when you click into that demographic, you'll find, what kind of detergent they buy, how often, what kind of cars they buy, how often they buy snacks. Do they like salty or sweet snacks? And all the rest of it will be there too, which is useless to us, right? But for the advertisers, let's say, if you're working at a local station on the ad sales team, then you're going to want to know, well, yeah, the audience for Ghosted is people, 24 to 45, and they're thinking about, having a child or a second child, and they're interested in, nursery products and stuff like that. And so then you can go to, wherever, Toys R Us or Babies R Us, and of course that would be a national account. So you wouldn't do that. Maybe a local kiddie store and say, whoa, man, our audience here has got lots of people looking to buy cribs and stuff. Maybe, would you like to advertise it? So that's why that's valuable information, not so much to fans, but definitely for the advertisers out there. So that's important. And, the networks are watching all of that too. And they're saying, we got too many shows for old folks. We need younger people here. Let's get those, millennial dramas up or something like that. So they're watching that too, on the business side. So cool. There's a video here that I eventually want to get to. So let's make sure it works. There it is. It does seem to work. Puppets, believe it or not. No offense. It's not that it's like stupid information. It's just the way that ESPN decided they would present their stuff.
Is it made for millenniums?
For millenniums or millennials?
Oh.
It actually, I think it kind of predates millennials probably. It's probably about, it would be like millennials when they were teenagers or something.
Like 2000.
It's probably 2000, something around there, I would say. Yeah. They have a Muppet look about them. Yeah. Tony?
How exactly do they figure out how many people are watching a specific thing?
I'm glad you asked that.
Especially on radio.
Yeah, sure. The topic for the rest of the class is exactly that. All right. So I could jump ahead, but then I get all confused in my slides. So we'll definitely get to it. All right. There are many challenges in terms of figuring out who does watch or listen. And historically, there are very few companies that have actually, been in this business. To the point that today Nielsen is everywhere except on the internet, which of course is of growing importance to everybody. But in every other area of broadcasting, Nielsen is a monopoly, basically. There's no one else in this business. Historically, there were different systems associated with different providers. Crossley was an early one. And of course, at that time, radio was the only media that was out there. They would phone people up at supper time and say, "What are you listening to?" And people would maybe tell the truth.
Go away.
Or maybe not, exactly. I think at the time, probably they would be less pissed off than they would now because radio was relatively new and you had to be somebody sort of upscale to have it. And if someone called you up, from a company that actually cared, probably it was a little better than now when they get out of my dinner hour, right? But what would you see would be the downside of the telephone recall system? Oh, by the way, this is even worse. I just made a mistake. The recall system is they would call you up and say, "What did you listen to last night, madam?" So what do you think was the downside of that?
Memory or trying to figure out exactly what it was.
Gotcha. Gino?
Not every person they call might have had a radio.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah.
I was gonna say it interrupts your daily routine.
So they would be pissed off at you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Inconveniences. It is believe me, Nielsen cares a lot if people don't want to participate in this day and age.
So at that time, they would just go down the list and call everybody?
Yes,
Mostly?
that's right. Yeah, and probably they would just call the first 100 on the list or however many they determined they needed, and then that would be it. It wouldn't even be any more comprehensive than that. So there are many reasons as to why this type of, the fallibility of memory. Perhaps somebody who thought they were so fancy that they wouldn't be caught dead listening to that show that they actually listened to, so they'd tell you some other better show in their view. So they may, due to social whatever pressure, or they may misreport, they may not remember. And even if they're trying to do their best, sometimes you just can't remember what you listened to a few days ago or something,
Yeah,
John.
and people who don't even answer the phone, so that's just.
Yeah, and so you would miss them.
And so it's no data. There,
No data, so you keep going down the list. It was very arbitrary. So that's the other thing, is this is always based on a small sample of the actual audience. So when the U.S. government does a census, they do their very best. So apparently the census is underfunded, and there's politics in that too. So perhaps they will no longer be doing their very best. But up until now, they do their best to account for every individual in every household in the country, which is a massive job. And they only do it once every 10 years for that reason, right? And it's very expensive, and you have to reach out years in advance and train the people who are going to do it. And this is where it looks like we're starting to fall down on that whole thing, of course. Because why should we count everybody when really the ones that matter are the Republican voters that we want to know about? However, that's one technique. Talk to every single individual. But the other technique, of course, that would be impossible for broadcasters. They use what's called sampling, which is, I was talking about this in audio class yesterday, but this is a different kind of sampling. You take a smaller number of people and you hope that they represent the entire population. So this is when it starts to get important, that as you go down the list calling people, that you actually make sure that you're calling a representative sample rather than just the first 100 names that show up, right? So there were various tweaks to this, but I jumped way ahead there. But there's the coincidental method where they would call up, Hooper would call up and say, oh, right now, what are you listening to? Which obviously eliminated some of the fallibility of memory issue, but maybe they would still lie to you or not answer the phone or whatever. Nielsen made it all look more scientific by making a mechanical box that could be attached to your radio, so that when you turned the dial on the radio, it would scratch a little, pen mark on a piece of paper, so that they would know actually which dial you had turned to. So this was supposed to eliminate the fallibility of memory and the lying about what you were actually listening to thing. So every day, the participating households, because now you would, basically recruit specific households, they would turn a little thing to advance the time, and then you would turn your knob, and so there would be on a long strip of paper, there would be a kind of a wiggle showing what you actually listened to, and that. It is more objective, I guess, than just asking people what they remember. And so that was a big success for the Nielsen company. It was called the Audimeter, and they still call their device an Audimeter, which with a couple of extra terms tapped on. But we're talking almost 100 years now, getting towards there, of Audimeter associated with Nielsen. And finally, the diaries. So Hooper didn't have the Audimeter, but they did have a diary, and diaries are still used nowadays. They look like this. And let's see, is this a TV diary? This is a radio diary. Okay. If you're participating in a sample, so you're part of a sample, that means they would call you up and recruit you. Say, hey, would you like to participate in audience research? We'll give you some merchandise, or we'll give you $15. They don't give a lot of money. It's ridiculous. And if you're in a small city, or actually anything like the 50 top cities are rated with an electronic device. Everything underneath is still with diaries and radio. And so they give you this for a week, and you fill this in, and it's like they want you to think about your whole day and write in what the station was, the call letters, or 97.3 or whatever, AM or FM, and where were you? Because that's very important to radio. Again, their angle is that, they want to show dominance in the car or outside of the home, and because radio is still a mobile listening experience versus TV, where you're usually at home or some very settled place, so they need to know where you are. Okay, so what could still be the weaknesses of this, the diary method? Yeah, Jenny?
Fallacy, just like the previous.
The fallacy of memory, right? Because you're still trying to remember. Absolutely, yeah.
Not doing it.
Not doing it, so you cop out, and at the end of the week, you fill it all in at the end and just guess. What the hell? They'll never know, right? The possibility that you won't remember like what station you were listening to, because they all play the same music, right? Which is why every station, almost between every song, will be, "You're listening to KCCC," the top of the pops here in the Bay Area. So they'll just keep on saying it, so that you are more likely to get the right call letters in there. So the diary method is far from perfect. It has some of those historical difficulties of audience measurement, and still another issue is who gets these diaries. You have to make sure that they go into the hands of, let's say, a representative group of people. If here in the Bay Area, 40% of the population are white, 25% are, Asian, Filipino, or whatever, and 10% are African American, 25% are Hispanic. Your sample should represent that, which means that you can't just pass these out on the corner. You really have to spend a lot of effort to target those groups, and it is some of those groups are harder to reach because they could care less about participating in ratings research. So they have to work very hard to recruit adequate numbers of especially those smaller categories in the population. They have to work extra hard in order to get a representative number. If they didn't, people would say, well, I mean, you've got some ratings information, but I've got a Spanish language station, and I can look at your sample, and I know that you've got like only half as many people in your sample as proportionally we have as our audience. So you guys are undercounting us, and that undermines the entire ratings operation, which, as we said, is pretty much a monopoly now, and also is absolutely central to the business of broadcasting. So if the ratings are not reliable, then the advertisers say, well, why should we pay you all this money? Because we can't even believe what you're telling us. And then the bottom starts to drop out of the business of broadcasting. So this is actually a really serious, really critical operation. And because it's almost a monopoly, we have had situations like in the New York market area where Spanish language stations said we're underrepresented in the samples, and the Attorney General of the state of New York sued Arbitron at the time and actually fined them not $1 million, but several $100,000 to punish them for having bad samples. Because what they said is, you're a monopoly, the business absolutely depends on you, you're doing a bad job, and you're costing money to those stations that have complained. And so you shall be punished and you shall do better. But it is hard for them to get, representative samples. So that's still and always an issue, right? How do they carve up the country? They carve them up into market areas. And here, because of the way that broadcast technology works, with an antenna and a signal that has a particular footprint geographically, it doesn't go all over the country. So broadcast ratings are broken up into a bunch of different little designations, but DMAs are the ones that most people remember. Designated market areas. That means the San Francisco Bay Area is a DMA. It extends down to San Jose, across the bay to Oakland. And part of that calculus is that, you know, a big transmitter on Diamond Heights or whatever will reach down to there. And so this is, you know, historically being the DMA. And there's 210 across the country. So some big, some small. Bay Area, fifth largest market in radio, so it's a very important area. A lot of money is poured in. And as we said during the radio programming class, you know, there's 40 plus commercial stations here in the Bay Area competing in this DMA. You go to one of the smaller ones, number 200, and you know, there's maybe one station or two stations only. So there's a geographic area on which the ratings are done. So imagine you're Nielsen now doing the radio ratings. You've got to have a presence in 210 different places, and you're constantly generating data about 210 different places. So it's a pretty big job, right? And you're recruiting local audiences, samples of 5,000 or so, and you're also recruiting national audiences for the networks. 20,000 or more families participating there on a regular basis. So it's a lot of work reaching out to the different you know, populations who are going to be part of your sample. Awesome. So in the radio business, the top 50 DMAs are monitored with a little electronic device called a portable people meter, and the rest of the country fills in diaries still. That's been the way it's been since, I'd say, mid-2000s, like maybe 2008, 2009. We got the portable people meter here in San Francisco. And there were huge changes. And at that time, I was teaching radio over at San Francisco State. And I was lucky enough to have a couple of students who had been through the program working for one for Entercom, one for Clear Channel, which is now iHeartRadio, and we'd always have them in to talk. And you know, the first year that those little meters came in, everyone was flipping out in the business. And let me explain why in a sec. Do we have a picture of a people meter just to show you what? Anybody participated in any of these things, by the way?
Never.
No. Once in a while, I'll meet somebody, and it's always like, oh, totally cool. So this is the set-top meter that you would have on a television, which is, you know, pretty standard. But this is the personal people meter. Sorry, I called it portable. I knew it was a PPM. Personal people meter. So it's a little thing, even smaller than a cell phone, and it has a microphone in it. And what it does is it basically monitors particular frequencies throughout the day. And in television and radio programming, those frequencies are inserted, little patterns basically, that we can't hear but that the people meter will pick up. And so if you're in the supermarket and the radio happens to be on, which I'm not sure is legal, but okay, if you're in some store which is not streaming Pandora or something but actually has the radio on, this will pick it up. If you know you're getting your car fixed and it's you know, on quietly, this will probably pick it up, you know, in somebody's office. If you're in your office and someone in the cubicle next door, this will pick it up. If you're in your car and you're actually listening, this will pick it up. Okay, so this is and then you go home and at night you stick it in a little cradle which is connected to the internet, and it beams all of that data back to Nielsen, and they've got it all digitized, right? Because imagine some poor people their job is to look through those diaries and code them. Thousands of diaries from all over the country. What a freaking bore, you know, and how expensive is that, right? So this way it's already electronic and it's beamed up to Nielsen. Wonderful. Yeah, Olive?
And it had a GPS system in it, right?
Yes. You know why?
Because it needs to know where you are.
In case
What your
you
DMA is.
lie, right? In case you leave it on the counter and don't carry it around with you all day, they need to know, right? So there's still, you know, there's still ways that the system falls down and isn't actually perfectly accurate. Good call, yeah. So they can actually tell by the movement of the device whether you're carrying it or not. And if you're not, then along with your data upload will go, well, this person didn't do their job today, so don't pay any attention to this. There's a little code that will go up like that.
And you said it worked for TV as well?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and would it work for something like a rerun or something like that?
Yeah, because it's the broadcaster that actually embeds the code.
Okay.
So it's not in the program
All
itself.
right. What if it's online though?
I don't think these are used online
Okay.
yet. Yeah, I don't think
I didn't
they
think
are.
so. Oh, that's what
Yeah,
I was curious.
you know, it's like in previous weeks, it's like the internet and mobile are developing, you know what I mean? Versus this stuff for radio and TV is very solid, and some of it is ported over to the internet, but I don't believe this is. That doesn't mean that they won't try to do it, because it's their best shot yet at objective measurement. So, well, let me tell you what my students told me is that they absolutely, when it came in here, it's now in 50 different markets for radio. When it came in here, it upended the business. Why? Because people were so used to reporting on the diary, one of their 3 or 4 favorite stations, maximum. How many call letters do you know for a station here? You might know Alice, you might know KMEL. I don't know what you listen to, but you know, if you listen to terrestrial radio at all. But you can typically people remember only the 3 stations or so, which meant that in the diary method, it was really biased towards the top few stations that people could remember, even if they were doing their best. When this thing comes in, it kept track of everything, and what people, you know, what we found out from a more objective measurement was that people were listening to lots of stations, and that the top 3 or 4 were actually rated much lower, and people were actually listening to some of the others that didn't rate very much. They were spending more time with them than they remembered. Systematically, to the extent that if you were like a Clear Channel top performing station or an Entercom top performing station, all of a sudden your ratings fell appreciably as soon as they started using this. And all those other stations came up. And so you had a crisis in the local industry here, because you could no longer just kind of sit back and say, we're number 2, we're number 1, because it turned out that maybe you were still number 1 between noon and 1 p.m., but then in the afternoon, some other player was actually tied with you, or et cetera, et cetera. So it squished them all together, and it made it much harder to sell just based on these clear distinctions about, yeah, we got the biggest audience or not. Everyone wound up having a sort of similar set of numbers. And so what they did try to do was they would define a certain day part and try to beat everybody else, you know, decisively in that day part. So then it became, we're number 1 in the afternoon with people driving home from work, you know, and then others would say, we're number 1 in the early morning with people getting ready to go out or something, you know. So it was like, it heightened the specificity of competitiveness and everything. Jenny?
So like when they would identify themselves as a drive time radio or something like that, a drive time station, that would be their unique identifier?
Yeah, that would be part of their branding. Yeah, and that would certainly tie into their quest to dominate a particular day part, you know? Yeah, to be, if you can't be number 1 everywhere because people, it no longer depends on the 2 or 3 stations they remember, then maybe you could be number 1 by just playing top 40 music that everyone wants to hear and no commercials at a particular time, you know? And then we listen and say, well, how can they afford to do that? Well, it's because the rest of the time they're playing commercials, but in that hour that they want to dominate, they'll do anything in order to get their ratings up above everybody else. So that was the effect of moving to a different method of recording audience numbers. So you can see how touchy this is, because a change like that costs people millions of dollars over the year. You know, if you're no longer definitively number 1, you probably can't have to give a bargain on some of your advertising sales that you used to be able just to sell like that. You know, so it makes a huge difference, even a little change like this, which is why this isn't in 200 markets, because they kind of go step by step and deal with the lawsuits and the, you know, craziness each step of the way. So it's it's a very serious part of the business, much more than just should we cancel the show or not. Huge amounts of money tied to this because of the advertising equation there. All righty. Let's, where am I? Okay, good. So we talked about the PPM. We talked challenges, location of viewing. It's not so much viewing as listening. Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered the main challenges. I don't want to go down to, method can influence response, but it's sure that if you send a human being out there, people are going to answer different than if you just stick a device on them and just record everything. For sure, people answer differently to other people. So to that extent, that is important, but that hasn't been as big an issue as sample composition, sample sizes and stuff.
Is there an app maybe for gathering?
There are other systems. There was a system in the East Bay which wanted to use your phone to gather, turn it into a PPM. I don't know where they're at with that. It's a good question. But sooner or later, yeah, why not pay me 50 cents a month to collect those codes through my phone? I mean, given that I trust every technology company not to listen into all my conversations and everything that's going on around me, right? But if it does go there, I could see that, Give me a little credit for, I don't know, my streaming service or something. Amazon will own everything, and Amazon will be able to hand out those cookies. I don't know, Jonathan?
I can understand radio needing something like that, but why would TV in today's age need a device like that when it's mostly all digital? And wouldn't the company or Cox Cable, whoever, be able to, or Time Warner, be able to facilitate that need?
Yeah, well, good question. And I think you have a good point there in that anything coming in through a cable or over the top, they know what you're getting, for sure. However, there's still a kind of anonymity of broadcast. We don't know what you're getting if you're tuning in over the air.
Right.
It's kind of like, I'm just thinking there's a parallel with spending cash or using a credit card. With a credit card, everybody knows everything, but cash is still sort of anonymous. Broadcasting is still kind of anonymous. So we could foresee someday where they just say, well, what the heck? You no longer need to monitor anything because we know everything that you're consuming.
I think that would be similar for the internet right now, is why they don't need a Nielsen system,
Yeah.
because they can see how many views they get or how many.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that the internet rating services can largely be driven through, what are people clicking on? How many clicks are there?
And that's how they get advertisers based off that data feedback.
Yeah, but then that depends on how much they know about you as part of a sample. So if they know everything about you demographically, which I'm sure Google and Facebook do, then it's true. At that point, they know, what kind of categories to sort you into, because they don't want to just sell you as an individual. They sell you as, a man of a certain age, et cetera, et cetera. So, but they'll know how to sort you, and they'll know what you're watching. It's
sense.
true. So we're probably looking towards that. But hang on, let's back up a sec. Why is this even important in television now? And what's going on in TV is, where's that picture? Sorry, guys. The picture of the set-top box. And so this is what, this is sort of what, whoa, what happened there? It logged me out. Well, you saw that picture. I'll log myself back in a sec. That set-top box has little buttons on it. And so in the television markets, and television is a way bigger business than radio, right? So there's even more at stake in terms of monitoring the TV audience. And TV households it's precisely that. The unit of measurement is a household. It's not an individual. So they put these boxes in a household, and there are buttons on the top so that little Jimmy comes in and watches his show. He's supposed to push that button. And little Sarah comes in and watches that show. She's supposed to. And if the whole family's watching Modern Family, God help them, then they click all of the buttons.
Yes.
And so there's a big possibility for error there in that, mom comes in, clicks her button, and then goes out to, do something better, get on the internet and learn something, for God's sake. And but her button's still pushed, so there's all kinds of problems with that. And so the PPM comes in there as well, because then that eliminates the error from the buttons. So if we can get the whole household to wear these PPMs, then it's more accurate that way. And they've also had trouble dealing with all of the many devices coming in. I mean, it sounds like, yeah, sure, Roku, sure. So over the top, broadcast, DVR, cable, right? I'm doing the dance today. But anyway, you can imagine that as each of those comes in, Nielsen's going, oh, no, not another one. We've got to monitor, and it takes time to make all the arrangements with all of the different program sources to get it all involved, right? Plus, you've got 20,000 of these across the country. You've got to have somebody come and install it. You've got to have someone sit down with a family and say, now you have a real responsibility here. If you lie to us, then the whole broadcast industry is going to be screwed. And so you've got to have outreach, installation, agreements. It's a huge...
It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, it is. And Nielsen, of course, that's their whole business. If some whippersnapper makes an end run around them on mobile, then they're in deep trouble, because, it's like media's changing. Sooner or later, it's all going to be online. Nielsen has to deal with today and with what's coming up. So it's like hugely difficult. So the PPM is still relevant in the household now to again, make things more accurate. But firsthand, what I thought was so fascinating was the way it turned the radio business upside down for a while, because of those changes. So a few terms of art, and then we can watch the Muppets. And I know you're dying to see them. So terms of art, it's like there are many ways of calculating ratings, and we'll talk just about some of the basic ones. And maybe next class we'll even look at, God forbid, how to calculate some of them, but really simple examples and stuff. One thing to remember is that this is both a pseudoscience. We want it to be accurate, and it's also a marketing ploy, right? At the very basis of it is like how to establish how much your spot is worth. And you want that to go up, and you want people to subscribe to your service, because that's what Nielsen wants. And so you're going to give them many ways to succeed, all right? Are you in a DMA? Are you in an MSA? Are you in a TSA? Each of those geographic delineations is a little different, and maybe one of them helps you shine, versus in another one you don't look so good. So you're going to go to the data that makes you look really, really good, all right? So that's one way that this works. Another way is that there are different measurements of ratings, different ways of calculating who's listening when, and you may shine based on one, and you may not look so good based on another. But if we make available all of these different ways, then you can pick the one you like and put that as top line in your advertising brochure or something like that. So there are different ways of evaluating. The first one is the distinction between rating and share, and we call it all ratings. But within the business, a rating is a little different than a share. So imagine we are assessing the audience for Modern Family. It's at 9 o'clock on whatever night. We can, if we're going to give a rating number, what we mean is that we know how many families own a TV set in the Bay Area. Maybe it's like 250,000 or something. And so we'll give you a rating if our sample tells us that out of the 5,000 that we have, 500 families were listening. Then we're going to say, okay, what's 500 out of 5,000? It's 10% of our whole sample, right? And crucially, what we're basing this on is all of the people, all of the families that have a TV set. But there's another measurement that we could give, which is share. And so basically, it's still the same 500 families we're listening to Modern Family or watching Modern Family, but now we're calculating just based on the people who turned on the TV. So it's a different measurement. Rating is you're basing it on everybody who could possibly be watching. Share, you're giving the number based on how many people actually were watching that night and chose to tune in to Modern Family at that time. Which means, and typically you're always going to be allowed to use either rating or share. We'll give you those numbers. And so what this means is that, the rating is a good measurement of just, an absolute, okay, how many people could have watched and how many people did. Your share is much more competitive. It's like, okay, now Tuesday night, not a lot of people were watching, but of that, you got a nice big chunk, So your share will always be a higher number. If not everybody turned on their TV that night, which is inevitable, you're going to get a bigger percentage. So share always sounds better. Share is always a higher number. So that's cool. And then another thing that we give is a cumulative number of persons who are listening. And this is where you give a number which sounds really huge because it's the actual number of individuals who are listening for some narrowly defined period of time, like maybe 5 minutes. So with Cume, that's where you get like 250,000 people, or better yet, 1,250,000 listeners. We don't tell you for how long they listened. We could define that period as 1 hour or 1 week, So you can get some pretty nice large numbers out of Cume, which sound really good. Whereas if you looked at your actual ratings or share, you'd only be like, only 2% of the population actually listened to this, but the population's big. So you could say, it might be 1 million people were actually 2%. So there's, I'm being kind of cynical here as I tell you this, but it is, in the industry, everybody knows you can't compare one to the other. Everybody knows share is going to be better than ratings. Everyone knows that these huge numbers of Cume, like 1.5 million or something, is really only individuals, and it might only be 2-3% or something. But for advertisers, that sounds really good. You can reach 10 million people, how much is that worth to you, So that's why. And then we didn't talk about AQH. So, radio splits the broadcast hour into 15-minute chunks. And so then if you listen to 5 minutes within the 15-minute chunk, you are counted as listening in that AQH. So even if you're like spinning the dial after every song or two, notice the average song on radio is probably 3.5 minutes. So you'd really have to be there for 2 songs or something. They're going to do their best to keep you for 2 songs. And then if you spin off, it doesn't matter. You've been counted in that quarter hour. So that's that. They're thinking very, very carefully about how to keep you enough time into the quarter hour. As we said, they're promoting something. Coming up after the break, we're going to give away, the chance to win $10,000. I said, okay, I'll listen. Just as long as they got you there for another 5 minutes, you're counted in the quarter hour, and they're happy. So each of these, is well known to the broadcaster who is figuring out how to make themselves look the very best, boost the numbers as much as possible. We talked about tent polling and stuff like that. It's all with an eye towards maximizing this type of stuff. All right, cool. Well, let's look at any questions before we dive into the Muppets? Yes, Jenny.
Of those options that you mentioned for measuring the ratings, the Cume, the share, and so on and so forth, if you're talking about trying to look palatable to your prospective clients, it would seem that ratings would be the best because it's this prospective numbers as long as they have, say, a media device, whether they be the radio or the television, then they're technically counted, and that would be a much larger number versus, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
No, you don't misunderstand at all. It's just all strategy.
Yeah, the latter ones seem to go into more specificity, and those would seem to generate smaller numbers. And
they do. Well, it depends. Cume gets you a nice, huge, kind of in the millions number. Where is it? Yeah, Cume. So, basically the answer is Nielsen collects the raw data of viewing, time, and identity of who you are, and channel that you're listening to. And by channel, I mean on many systems. After that, this is all just a kind of slice and dice, right? This is different ways of calculating it. So they make available to their clients all of this. The hard part is getting the raw data. It's like, who was sitting there watching, et cetera. Once you've got it, this is just a computer going, let's hear about Cume, let's hear about this, let's hear about that. And of course, it gets even more specific in that people want to know, okay, rating, but was this live while the show was on? Or is it live +3? Or is it live +7, in which we account for time shifted as well? So they'll even, in fact, dig down even more. And you say, well, why would they want to know that, when isn't it just the biggest number that wins? But in fact, there's all kinds of reasons why they may want to know, depending on the product, depending on the use of this, why they may want to know that, well, we don't have a lot of people watching on the night of, but we do have a lot of people when you calculate it all over the whole week. So you could imagine for an advertiser who's advertising something that's very time specific, the live rating is probably very important. But for an advertiser who's kind of building something, over a longer period, live +7 is probably, more interesting. Another thing is you're competing with other media, and as a broadcast medium, you have immediacy, right? You do have synchronous viewing as an option, versus if you're a magazine publisher, it's, you can't make that argument. It's like the magazine, if anyone's buying it, of course, sorry, but if anyone's buying it, they might look at it, on the 1st of the month or on the 31st of the month in the doctor's office, or even afterwards. So they don't even have that tool, because all of these businesses are fighting against each other. Another one of my ex-students was in sales and said that in Intercom, at one point, they had a kill print month where they said they took the Chronicle, they looked through who's advertising in the Chronicle, every single business, and then they sent their sales teams out with the argument, you're in the Chronicle, that's old media, come with us, we've got radio, but we've also got websites, and so they actually targeted that specifically, local advertisers, and she told me also, sometimes you're sitting there pitching and you walk out and you see the people from Slate, or you see the people from Chronicle, like they all know each other. So they're all competing with the same clients. They have to be able to make a case not just against other broadcast media, but against every other medium too. So that was pretty interesting to find out, that you're battling not just your competitor, but a whole other media. So, whoa, let's watch the Muppets. I think the point is, Jenny, that we have limited knowledge. We don't know the extent to the purposes to which everybody in the business uses ratings and stuff. But they do want the very precise information depending on what they want to do with it. Another example is, I keep putting off the Muppets. How could I? But another example is I was talking a lot to Current TV. This is, again, old news, so you'll say, he's pulling out all this old stuff that's no longer relevant. Anyone know what Current TV was? It was Al Gore's cable channel, which was going to be super interactive. So it was early on, they would have competitions where you could make an ad for Sony, and then the winner would actually go on Current, and they had miserable ratings, miserable. They didn't even pay to be rated by Nielsen. And you'd say, well, that's suicide. Why would they do that? Well, they had other forms of buzz. They had Al Gore, they had all this interactivity and stuff like that, and plenty of investors early on based on that. So they didn't have to turn a profit necessarily in the beginning. So why should they go ahead and get ratings which would be miserable they could save some money. And so instead what they did is they created their own online sample, their own panel of who else? People who were super engaged with Current and with their whole platform. And they would do all of their audience analysis of that. So then they would say, well, sorry, we don't have set-top box numbers for you, but we have our own custom panel. And they show that, you know, your Sony ad, which was produced by a 16-year-old from Millbrae, but was the best damn thing you've ever seen because it was super creative and super edgy and stuff, that had like 100% approval from our custom panel. And it worked for a while, you know, it was, and so you'd think, well, suicide, right, to not be rated. But in fact, it worked for them for a while until they had to sell, you know, and that was it. Yeah, and then Al Jazeera bought them, right? And Al Jazeera was on cable for a while, and now it's just an app on the phone. So trouble with that whole thing. But really quite fascinating to hear to me, and I hope to you guys. Now for the Muppets. So, right, how do I make this go full screen?
You gotta hit play first.
I gotta hit play first, and then
just go on
share
YouTube.
I think this way. Thank you. I think you're millenniums. I think we call you that, don't we? Or no? Are you?
Click it again.
I will click it again, but let me just tell you about the Muppets and why this is a little bit of a special thing. This was not made for, you know, to show on ESPN to educate a general audience. This is a sales tool trying to explain to people who might be interested in advertising on the ESPN cable network, like how all of this works, like what are all these numbers and stuff.
So this was given to adults.
This would be shown to adult media buyers, or maybe even, you know, people getting together at the local cable operator level to say, okay, how are we going to sell ESPN, which of course they're paying, you know, they're forcing their subscribers to pay a lot of money, $5-6 per subscriber to get this. So it's very valuable. How do we sell this to companies, like little local businesses that are there covered by our local cable network here? So here we go. Is it loud enough? As loud as I can make it.
Good evening, and welcome to the latest installment of Rating Center. I'm Chip Spaulding, alongside Clay Rogers here to cover the finer points of TV ratings. What do you say, Clay?
Well, Chip, it turns out our viewers have been tweeting up a storm. Everybody wants to know how the rating system works. Since we here at Rating Center consider ourselves the ratings experts, we feel it our humble obligation to give the people what they want. First, to size our audience, we turn to Nielsen. To estimate TV audiences, Nielsen starts by creating a sample that accurately reflects the population. They employ a random sample where all homes have an equal chance of being selected. This ensures that the sample mirrors the population according to gender, age, geography, race, cable status, and other characteristics.
So, say 49% of the population is male. Does that mean 49% of Nielsen's random sample is also male?
Well said, Chip. And all under 140 characters. Totes tweet-worthy.
Holy fastball, folks. I've just gotten word that a Nielsen correspondent is on her way to install a meter in an actual household. Let's go there live.
Thanks, Chip. I'm about to place a meter that monitors usage on every TV, DVR, DVD, and game console in the home. Like a dog whistle that only the meter can hear, audio codes embedded in TV content identify the network, date, and timestamp. The Nielsen sample consists of homes that agreed to participate for up to 2 years. The meters have remotes pre-programmed with each household's members' info. They log in when they start watching TV and log out when they're done. That data is then sent back to Nielsen each night to be processed.
Wow, looks like networks and advertisers really know their key audiences. You mentioned DVRs. How do those factor in, Chip?
Funny you should ask, Clay. I actually majored in statistics.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. To get the most accurate ratings, you have to look at all viewing behaviors. Not only do you consider those who watch live, but also live plus same day and live plus 7 days. What are you doing over there, Clay?
I'm tuning in so I can watch us live. I need to check out my sexy stash on screen.
Oh, totally sexy. I always just set my DVR to record us and study my Don Johnson stare at night when I get home. That reminds me, I need to set my DVR to record Real Housewives of Bristol while I'm on vacay for the rest of the week. That's the first thing I'll watch when I get home at the end of the week.
Hey! So to recap, boys and girls, live viewing means you watch the program as it was happening. Live plus same day viewing means you either watched it live or watched it from your DVR within the same day. Live plus 7 viewing means you either watched it live or watched it from your DVR within 7 days of when it aired.
Thanks, Clay. Well, we've reached that time in our program where we perform our ratings formula. For that, let's go to expert number cruncher Baxter Orion.
Thank you, Chip. Nielsen has gathered the data from the meters to project the number of homes or viewers watching in the entire population. This is known as impressions. Additionally, each cable network has a total number of subscribers possibly watching a program known as its universe. When we take the number of impressions and divide it by the universe, we get a percentage, which is our cable coverage rating. Now, let's say 2 different cable networks had 25 million people watching in prime time. One network had 100 million subscribers, while the other had 50 million subscribers. Putting this in our formula, we get, the first network delivered a 25.0 coverage rating, and the other delivered a 50.0 coverage rating.
Exactly, because the first network's universe is double the latter. It's also important to remember that a rating is an average minute statistic. So, let's say the Monster Truck Rally earned a 25.0 rating. Then 25% of cable network subscribers were watching during the average minute of that telecast.
Oh, and what about commercial minutes? Do they count toward the program rating too, huh? Do they?
Oh, you bet they do. All minutes of the program are averaged together. But many advertisers only want ratings for the commercials. For that, we just take the average of each commercial minute's rating in that program, and we include anyone who watched live, plus any DVR playback within 3 days. We call commercial ratings C3 ratings. The C stands for commercial, and the 3 stands for viewing within 3 days.
Bax, you're blowing my mind. What else you got?
Cable network ratings can also be represented as U.S. ratings. Only now, the U.S. ratings universe includes all TV homes in the country. The number of impressions is now divided by the number of possible viewers in the entire country. This universe is used for all broadcast networks and, ultimately, for comparing one cable network to another.
And that's all she wrote.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this week, folks. This is Chip Spaulding.
And I'm Clay Rogers for Rating Center, saying, Go forth and calculate.
This is ESPN, the Entertainment and Sports Programming Network.
There we go.
What's that rating? Or views? Is it on YouTube?
Oh, how many views? Right.
1,000.
Click YouTube.
YouTube down here to get to the page.
2 comments.
All right. Thank you, my fellow millennials.
Dang.
How many?
10
comments. It's probably
How many
like
comments? 9.
probably a good 30,000 of them are university students. I don't know. Let's see. We didn't see what anyone was doing. Chat. Oh, yeah. Is there?
My dog is barking.
The ABC.
My dog is barking at the Muppet.
Awesome. Okay, first, Corey, I don't know if there's a difference in price that price vary between local station like Cron. Well, CNN wouldn't be a local station, it's a cable network. I'm not sure whether Cron would get a different deal than its competitors like KCBS or KPIX, I guess, in the television, right? Same group, but they have a different name. So I'm not sure about that. And John brings up something interesting, which you'll often hear broadcasters complain that Netflix doesn't rate any of its shows, and they feel that
Well, they do, right? They just don't give it to you.
Yeah, right. I mean, they know how many people, they know exactly how many people stream it, but they don't release that information like out to be competitive with the broadcasters, and the broadcasters have always complained about it. Did you hear about the ABC executive exposing Netflix ratings data? Yeah, so I think they had, there are other services which try, and rather, unlike Nielsen, which does all of its research the way that we've seen, there are other services which somehow try to deduce how many people are listening or something. And I think the ABC exec had gotten hold of that sort of third-party ratings material, the information. And yes, and I think everyone was fascinated to try to find out, well, how well does Game of Thrones actually do? Because in terms of notoriety, aka buzz, it's like everybody knows about that show, but nobody has a number to say, oh yeah, everyone knows about it, but it only gets 2% of the audience or something like that. So that was of interest, yeah. But so another reason why you might not want to have your program service rated, again, if it doesn't add up too well against the others, who knows? I don't know. Excuse me. And then the other complaint about that I've heard about Netflix not issuing ratings is that if you work for Netflix and you have a hit show, you would like to be able to say, well, we're responsible for a huge part of your audience. Look at the ratings. But since nobody really knows except Netflix, all the shows that are funded by Netflix, they just have to guess. They can't say.
I can watch podcasts of comedians and stuff who have done specials on Netflix, and they'll call you, and depending on how well you've done, they'll give you the money, but they won't let you negotiate.
Okay.
And that's their whole reason for people who are doing something like a Netflix original. They won't give you any of it just so you can't negotiate.
Right.
So they can give you what they want.
So there's another angle where, we didn't even put that up, but, yeah, of course, ratings is a kind of an objective, semi-objective. It's the best we can do. So if you're making an argument to the network that you're worth more, you've got ratings on your side. But like Mason's saying, for Netflix, you don't really have anything solid. So what can you say? Right? Sexual harassment, you're out. Price from Amazon had to step down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a couple new directors.
A lot of vile behavior is surfacing, and hearing all of this, it's incredible. Historically, the entertainment business has been really bad, but to hear the depths, I'm sure we haven't heard the depths of it yet, but anyway, it's pretty discouraging.
Are you talking about like the numerous sexual harassment?
Yes, I am.
That come out from different actors.
Right.
And everything?
So the head of Amazon Studios stepped down last week to avoid, being let go for.
That one's kind of confusing.
Similar type of.
I was reading into that, and it just seems kind of like. I don't know. That's enough to talk about, I guess. Yeah.
Well, okay. It's maybe it's food
Media
for
class.
another conversation, but I don't think someone that powerful would step down without some pretty serious motivation.
Or his wife,
it wasn't just like
his wife divorced him. That's where I was like, oh, maybe it is right. Stepping down, I would think that's just to avoid a big problem, not necessarily the truth. But when his wife left him, I was like, nah.
Anyway, my fault for dragging us into the current debate of the day. But I think you've heard enough about ratings for today. And so next class, we'll go on with the slides, and we'll have a Kahoot to kind of test some of this out. We'll talk about how, a little bit about how this is calculated and media is compared one against the other. But that's it. Yeah, and I'll have your exam results on paper for you next class, but you can see them in Canvas if you want. Cool. So long.